ashamed to take the bay. As soon as the valley was gone, we feel just as heavy as lead, but we never get up to the sergeant, bring the breakfast up to bed. Oh, 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 it's a lovely war. What do we want with eggs and ham? We've got plum and apple jam.
By mid-August 1914, British troops were making their way through France and Belgium. The British Expeditionary Force was well equipped and very well trained, but lacked the numbers that would be necessary to take on the German army. Alongside the French allies, the British were soon to engage the Germans outside the Belgian town of Mons. The German armies advancing on the left flank of the Allied lines outnumbered the British a staggering 7-1. Yet, the British fought bravely and effectively. In fact, the first 2 Victoria Crosses of the war were won here. In this video, recorded in 1984, Lance Corporal George Rippon of the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry describes the first engagement with the Germans.
Well, we eventually got onto this so-called Mons-Conde Canal, and in extended order, and we were 3 yards apart easily. We just laid there, and the bugles were sounding, and the bands were playing, and these columns of Germans were coming up. You couldn't miss them. And this is why I think they thought we had machine guns, because the British Army was absolutely spot on with the rifle. It was. I was very proud. And then, I saw several chaps killed, and we fought. We fired and fired, and until we could. The barrels got so hot that you couldn't hold the rifle, and you picked the dead fellow's rifle up and used his till you got your own cooled down. And then the whistle went, retire.
That order to retire, heard by Lance Corporal Rippon, had at first seemed like a momentary respite, but this became a withdrawal, and then a long and dreadful retreat. Britain's best fighting army faced total annihilation at the hands of the tsunami of enemy troops. Pursued by the Germans, the British Expeditionary Force pulled back an incredible 200 miles. 13 days and nights on the march, barely any time to sleep. As you can imagine, such conditions caused a great deal of hallucinations and confusion. One young officer recalled, "I had the most amazing of hallucinations, marching at night. So I was fast asleep, I think. Everyone was reeling about the road and seeing things. I saw all sorts of things. Enormous men walking towards me, and lights and chairs and things in the road." Private Frank Richards of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers said, "March, march, for hour after hour without halt." We were now breaking into the 5th day of continuous marching with practically no sleep in between. Stevens said, "There's a fine castle over there, see?" pointing to one side of the road. But there was nothing there. Very nearly everyone was seeing things. We were all so dead beat. Stories began to circulate back home in Britain about divine intervention that had aided the British retreat. It was said that spectral angels of English bowmen that fought at Agincourt had appeared on the battlefield, led by St. George himself, and covered the army as it fell back with volley after volley of arrows. This story became widely popularised by the press and word of mouth back home, but there were no reports from soldiers on either side in the immediate aftermath of the battle that this had actually happened. Now this can all be likely explained by the fact that a month after the Battle of Mons, a writer named Arthur Machen wrote a short fictitious story called The Bowman for the London Evening News, and this wasn't marked as fiction. Machen tried his best to inform the public that he'd invented the story, but it was already well cemented in the public mind. Perhaps it wasn't a bad thing, as it led to people believing that divine forces were on their side. The story of the Angel of Mons is undoubtedly the most popular ghost story from the First World War, and it clearly had a positive impact among troops, as well as on the home front by way of a big morale boost. Nevertheless, The story and its popularisation stems from fiction, rumour, third-hand accounts and false memory. It remains a fascinating story, but it was undoubtedly very sensationalised. But in the midst of that terrible conflict, there were many more strange and eerie accounts of ghosts and phantoms that have been largely forgotten now. Stories that serve no real propaganda purpose or patriotic encouragement, but simply recorded odd and strange happenings from the front. There was another supernatural encounter that was spoken of and written about by soldiers that were present at the Battle of Mons and the Great Retreat. It's a curious thing. I came across two newspaper articles, both from 1915 and both published in the London Evening News. The first comes from Lance Corporal A. Johnston of the Royal Engineers, and he's quite sceptical of the idea of the supernatural. The article reads as follows: Phantom Horseman, a soldier's experience during the Great Retreat. In a letter to the Evening News, with reference to the stories of the Angels of Mons, Lance Corporal A. Johnston, late of the Royal Engineers, who experienced all the hardships of the Great Retreat, writes as follows: I would like to relate an incident that happened to myself, which, although it doesn't go to prove the supernatural, shows that under conditions of great distress and fatigue, the mind controls the most ordinary things into the mystic. I must call my experience the Phantom Horseman. We had almost reached the end of the retreat, and after marching a whole day and night, with but 1.5 hour's rest in between, we found ourselves on the outskirts of Langy near Paris, just at dawn. And as the day broke, we saw in front of us large bodies of cavalry, all formed up into massive squadrons. Fine, big men on massive chargers. I remember turning to my chums in the ranks and saying, "Thank God, we're not far from Paris now, look at the French cavalry." They too saw them quite plainly, but on getting closer, to our surprise, the horsemen vanished and gave place to banks of white mist, with clumps of trees and bushes dimly shown through them. Quite a simple illusion, yet at the time we actually picked out the lines of man and horse as plainly as possible, and almost imagined we heard the champing of the horse's bits. When I tell you that hardened soldiers, who had been through many a campaign, were marching quite mechanically along the road and babbling all sorts of nonsense and sheer delirium, you can well believe we were in a fit state to take a row of beanstalks for all the saints in the calendar. So, Lance Corporal Johnston ends his account stating that he believes that what he saw was a result of his fatigue, as everyone was babbling nonsense and seeing strange things. But the following month, another submission came in, this time from an anonymous lieutenant colonel. The article reads as follows: The Visions at Mons, a lieutenant colonel's testimony. One of the most interesting additions to the puzzling controversy ranging round Mr. Macken's famous story of the Bowman appears below. The writer's rank, and the fact that the mysterious cavalcade he describes was seen by many different people, makes this an important addition to the hitherto somewhat shadowy evidence of the visionaries. Meanwhile, the discussion continues unabatedly, and the demand for the Bowman and other tales mounts up into still greater proportions. A remarkable letter from somewhere in France has just been received by Mr. Arthur Macken, author of The Bowman, from a distinguished lieutenant colonel who was in the retreat from Mons. The officer is led to tell of his visions of phantom horsemen in this retirement because of Mr. Macken's postscript in which he wrote concerning the alleged visions. It is odd that nobody has come forward to testify at first hand to the most amazing event of his life. It is this remark, writes the officer, which inclines me to write. I have read the admirably written legends with great interest, and I propose to tell you that my experience during the retirement, without exaggeration, without embellishment of any sort. This letter furnishes the best authenticated first-hand evidence of supernormal occurrences in the retreat from Mons that is yet to come to hand. It is written by an officer of undoubted standing, and the Evening News has confirmed the identification particulars supplied. Although, for obvious reasons, the Lieutenant Colonel desires that his name shall not be published. The letter is as follows. On August 26, 1914, was fought the Battle of Le Cateau. We came into action at dawn and fought till dusk. We were heavily shelled by the German artillery during the day, and, in common with the rest of our division, had a bad time of it. Our division, however, retired in good order. We were on the march all the night of the 26th, and on the 27th, with only about 2 hours rest. The brigade to which I belonged was rearguard to the division, and during the 27th we took up a great many different positions to cover the retirement of the rest of the division, so that we had very hard work, and by the night of the 27th we were all absolutely worn out with fatigue, both bodily and mental fatigue. No doubt we also suffered a certain extent from shock, but the retirement still continued in excellent order, and I feel quite sure that our mental faculties were still quite sound and in good working condition. On the night of the 27th, I was riding along in the column with 2 other officers. We'd been talking and doing our best to keep from falling asleep on our horses. As we rode along, I became conscious of the fact that, in the fields on both sides of the road along which we were marching, I could see a very large body of horsemen. These horsemen had the appearance of squadrons of cavalry, and they seemed to be riding across the fields and going in the same direction as we were going, and keeping level with us. The night was not very dark, and I fancied that I could see squadron upon squadron of these cavalrymen quite distinctly. I did not say a word about it at first, but I watched them for about 20 minutes. The other 2 officers had stopped talking. At last one of them asked me if I saw anything in the fields. I then told him what I had seen. The 3rd officer then confessed that he too had been watching these horsemen for the past 20 minutes. So convinced were we that they were really cavalry that, at the next halt, one of the officers took a party of men out to reconnoitre, and found no one there. The night then grew darker, and we saw no more. The same phenomenon was seen by many men in our column. Of course, we were all dog-tired and overtaxed, but it is an extraordinary thing that the same phenomenon should be witnessed by so many different people. I myself am absolutely convinced that I saw these horsemen, and I feel sure that they did not exist only in my imagination. I do not attempt to explain the mystery, I only state facts. So what really happened? These 2 articles came out a year after they were said to have taken place, and they came out after Macken's Bowman story, which created a lot of demand for supernatural tales like this. Were these 2 stories made up? Perhaps, but in the first article, the witness dismisses what he saw as a result of fatigue, and doesn't believe the horsemen he saw were actually horsemen. And the second witness wishes to remain anonymous, so isn't looking for fame, and there's no goal or patriotic agenda to his story, unlike the Angels of Mons. Perhaps though it all was false memory, or even just creative writing. But maybe it was real. If it was, then I'm left with some questions. Were these horsemen the ghosts of Frenchmen, as Lance Corporal Johnston thought? Or were they something else? Further, were they in the form of contemporary cavalry at the time, or were they the ghosts from an era long ago? How many more men actually saw these ghosts? The answer to these questions we'll of course never know, as everyone that was there has passed on, and these 2 articles are all we have regarding the Phantom Horsemen at Mons. But regardless of whether you believe it or not, these articles, hidden away in a 1950 newspaper, are undoubtedly a fascinating piece of history.